Savannah Guthrie's mother disappeared more than 10 weeks ago. And now on Friday, April 17th, 2026, the FBI finally has one of the most important pieces of evidence from inside Nancy Guthrie's house. Not new evidence, old evidence, finally in FBI hands. And that distinction may be the most important part of the entire story, because this is not a case of investigators suddenly finding something new. It is a case of potentially critical evidence collected back in February, finally reaching the FBI lab after weeks of delay, weeks of questions, and weeks of public frustration. And if this sample can actually be separated and analyzed in a meaningful way, then this case may not be getting a new clue. It may finally be getting a real chance to use an old one. Now, here is what has been confirmed. On Friday, April 17, 2026, multiple major outlets reported that the FBI is now analyzing DNA-related evidence recovered from inside Nancy Guthrie's home in Tucson, Arizona. That coverage appeared across ABC, Newsweek, Arizona Republic, USA Today, Fox News, People, and others. According to those reports, the material sent to the FBI includes a hair sample collected from inside the house. But here is the key point. This is not new DNA evidence. According to reporting that cites an FBI official, the material was collected in February. The FBI requested it more than 2 months ago, and the Pima County Sheriff's Office initially sent it to a private lab in Florida. Only after roughly 11 weeks was the original hair sample transferred to the FBI laboratory for analysis. So let's say it clearly. This is not a "they just found DNA" story. This is an old evidence is finally being analyzed by the FBI story. And honestly, that may be even more important, because it raises a much better question. Not what did they just find, but why did potentially important evidence
noise without producing enough evidentiary traction? This update changes that. Not because it solves the case, not because it identifies a suspect, not because it tells us where Nancy is, but because it brings the focus back to the one place the case always needed to return to. Inside the house, inside the evidence, inside the physical core of what happened. And that is why this story is so much stronger than the side stories that have been dominating the case recently, because those stories were about fallout. This one is about evidence. Now, here is where the update becomes more complicated. Sheriff Chris Nanos has already said the DNA recovered from Nancy Guthrie's home was mixed. That means genetic material from more than one person. And mixed DNA is one of the hardest things for the public to understand, and one of the hardest things for investigators to untangle. Because once a sample is mixed, it is no longer a clean, straight line. Investigators have to separate contributors, isolate what matters, and figure out whether any part of that evidence actually belongs to the person connected to the crime. That takes time. And according to recent reporting, Nanos has warned it could take up to 6 more months to separate the sample enough to get usable answers. That point matters a lot, because if people hear hair sent to the FBI and immediately assume breakthrough next week, they are going to outrun the facts. The facts here are more disciplined than that. The material is old, the sample is mixed, the process is difficult, and the timeline may still be long. But that does not make this a weak story. It makes it a serious one. Because now we are looking at what may be the clearest forensic bottleneck in the entire case. And that bottleneck may finally be shifting. That is why today matters. Not because there is a neat emotional payoff.
And that is why this story should be framed as a story about possibility, not certainty, not new evidence, new possibility. That is the phrase I would put over this entire update, because if the earlier path was limiting what investigators could do with this sample, and if the FBI lab now has a better chance of separating or analyzing it in a meaningful way, then this case may finally be getting a more serious forensic opportunity than it had before. And that is a meaningful development. Now, let's talk about why the public reaction is so intense. Location. That is what makes this story hit harder. This is not evidence found on a random roadside, not something discovered in a public area, not a sample with endless innocent explanations built into the location. This is being reported as hair from inside Nancy Guthrie's house, inside the house she disappeared from, inside the house tied to the crime scene, inside the house where investigators believe something happened. That is why this story lands differently, and the public is right to pay attention. But it has to be the right kind of attention. Not case solved, not the FBI has the suspect, not this changes everything overnight. What we can say is narrower than that, but still powerful. As of Friday, April 17th, 2026, one of the most potentially significant pieces of physical evidence from inside Nancy Guthrie's home is finally being analyzed by the FBI after a long delay. That is enough. That is credible. That is strong. And that is worth real attention. Now, let's also be clear about what this does not prove. It does not prove the hair belongs to the abductor. It does not prove the sample can be cleanly separated. It does not prove the FBI will get a usable profile. It does not prove
Why I would frame today's update this way. For the first time in weeks, the Nancy Guthrie case has a forensic development that is both real and central. Real because it is backed by multiple major outlets. Central because it goes back to the house itself, not the media circus around the case, not the neighborhood fallout, not the family pressure, not the side noise. The house, the evidence, the sample, the lab. That is the center of gravity, and it is exactly where this case needed to return. Because if Nancy Guthrie's disappearance is ever going to move from speculation to identification, it is going to happen through something like this. A piece of material that has been there from the beginning. A sample that was delayed, mixed, frustrating, or incomplete. And then finally, a better attempt to extract what it may have been holding all along. That is why this is a strong update. Not because it is flashy, because it is consequential. So, where does that leave us tonight? Nancy Guthrie is still missing. There is still no public arrest. There is still no named suspect. And this analysis may still take months. But on Friday, April 17th, 2026, one thing became clear. The FBI now has the original hair sample from inside Nancy Guthrie's house. Not new evidence, old evidence, now under new analysis. And tonight, that may be the most important distinction in the entire case. If you have information about Nancy Guthrie's disappearance, contact the FBI at 1-800-CALL-FBI. And tell